Okay, I have a bit of a confession to make. Of course, we did the Learner Personas webinar last week, and it was a great success. But unfortunately, I forgot to press record for the first 10 minutes. So I'm doing you a separate audio version for the first initial bit, just so that you've got everything understood and under control from the get-go. So, welcome to our webinar on building learner personas. Thanks so much for everyone joining us today. Let's just get straight into it. So, some people may or may not know what a persona is. From my perspective, if we're talking about it, whether we're looking from a marketing perspective or indeed learning perspective, we are talking about semi-fictional representation of your learners, which has a combination of qualitative and quantitative feedback. So we want structured data and we want to hear their opinions. And it's also likely going to include some assumptions as well. So what we're trying to do is create broad buckets or frameworks of personalities or personas for your target audiences to enable you to tailor your approach differently to each cohort. Essentially, we're going to help you silver pineapple the crap out of your segmentation approaches. That is a new phrase, and we are going to start using it. So, what is the purpose of a persona? Well, from my perspective, there are three very key roles that a persona plays within an L&D function in particular. So, number one, we're looking to improve our approaches to targeting our people, right? So this isn't just from a marketing or learning campaigns perspective. This is also to help you better understand your audiences, to help you improve the production value of the learning that you create. You can create different segments of audiences and therefore create tailored learning, which actually is distinct and unique to their wants, needs, and requirements. We need to do that these days because we know that our people expect personalization. All you have to do is use the internet or go on any social media device these days, and it's very clear that personalization plays an incredibly large role on our experience online. We need to a part of that pie in L&D, and we need to start aligning with our learners' expectations. And primarily, this all helps for us to have more meaningful discourse with our audiences. It means that we can have a better conversation with them because we understand their emotional drivers, we understand their pain points and their needs and wants. And primarily, that's going to mean that we can tailor our approach so that it's much more distinctive to them and also going to be more effective for you. I told you there was a lot of gifts. I'm sorry. Your learners are all different. We're talking to a lot of different people here. We've got people who are coffee cups. We've got, the chicken and the ice cream cone, and they all want different things. They all need different things. They all have really different emotional drivers. So why are we trying to reach and connect them with them in exactly the same way? A kind of scattergun spray and pray approach is never going to be effective. It really never was in marketing, but, as you guys have probably seen, if you consume anything online, marketing has evolved itself immensely as we've gotten more data on our audiences. And therefore we tailor our approach really distinctly on a per audience basis. So sometimes we do that through tech, like our email programs allow us to do a certain amount or automation. And other times we do it through things like personas. So, developing specific campaigns that are tailored and targeted to distinct audiences. So I really just wanted to kind of very clearly talk a little bit about, we need to start talking to our audiences differently. It's really, really important. We can't just keep on hitting them with the same messages over and over and over again and expecting, Bob, who lives in Dubai and, works on a shop floor versus, Sandra, who is, in your HR department. These are very different people and they have different requirements, expectations, etc. Okay, I have to get off the gift slide now because it's like outrageous, isn't it, really? So I wanted to just ask you guys a quick question. So here's a little bit of interactivity for you on a Thursday afternoon. So if you just go to the top of your Zoom, you should be able to see something called annotate. And if you click on the annotate button, then you can see stamp and you can select a variety of stamps. But what I want you to do is once you've got a stamp, tell me, what do you feel like you know your learners? You should be able to actually easily interact with the screen now. All right, so we're getting a good mixture here. I like people that are, you know, very much on the cusp. Some feel like they definitely do. Oh, someone's gone rogue with some line work. I feel like it's a heart. I'm gonna think that that's for me. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, would you say? You know, actually, most people are saying that they feel like they do have a good understanding of their learners. So why are we here then? If you guys know your learners, you know, what are we looking at personas for? Well, maybe there are just a few more questions that we could ask to enhance your understanding of who they are. But primarily from my perspective is really hitting on those emotional drivers and those emotional pieces, because that's what makes marketing work and that's what makes things really resonate. So it's all good and well understanding, well, you know, people come to our LMS every 3 days and, you know, they absolutely love the off-the-shelf learning that we curated for them. So everything's hunky-dory, but there's always opportunities for optimization and improvement too. So I think that, you know, that is great that you guys feel like you understand your learners. So let's deepen that knowledge and let's really extend what you already know about them. So I'm just going to clear the screen so that we don't have that on to the next slide, because that would be kind of weird and scary. So as I've said, an in-depth learner persona or a couple, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about how we might, oh, Fiona's still curious about the situation. It will help you understand your people better. So I'll talk to you a little bit more. What we're going to do from this stage is talk about some of the key areas that you'll look at using when developing your persona, some of the key psychographic, demographic, geographic parameters that you'll want to consider, and the sorts of questions that you could potentially ask your people and ask yourselves as well, because like I said, there's going to be some assumptions in there too. But primarily, you're going to better understand where you can spend your time and energy. You're going to help ensure that your learning is more effective, and you're going to help further enhance your learning brand by better understanding your people and tailoring your approach to them. So, as I said, persona fundamentals. We're going to look at 4 key segmentation areas today, and then I'm going to talk you through a couple of example personas that I've just grabbed quickly off the internet, and then also talk you through the persona template that we've got for you guys that we'll send out separately off the back of the webinar. From my perspective, and of course there are other parameters, but I'm trying to keep it as simple as we can here, there's 4 key areas that we should be looking at. And that is your structured data, you know, demographics, geographics, and then your less structured data, which is, you know, the psychographics. How are people thinking and feeling, and, you know, all that nice, juicy, fluffy stuff. And then behaviors, you know, what are they actually doing, and how does that compare to what they're saying they're doing? At least in my experience, sometimes if you ask people, oh, you know, do you do this or do you do that? They have one opinion, but actually their behaviors are often quite different. So it's good to balance their feedback with some actual information and structured data as well. So first step. Well, I guess before we go any further, does anyone have any initial questions at that stage? So, all right, so where were we? I apologize for that. Demographics. So there are so many different ways that you can segment your audiences, right? We could look at talking to just different generations through age, right? We could look at Gen Z versus Gen Y versus millennials. There's absolutely tons of internet information which would help you better understand each of those different audiences. All right, Lexi's here representing Gen Z. I am very much Gen Y. Have we got any millennials? Wait, am I a millennial or no? Gen Y. It's okay. It's like doing the math. I don't know. So what we're trying to do here is get some more structured context. Oh, have I just left boomers out completely? Sorry, Dave. So we're trying to understand our people much more in a structured way here, right? So this is information that you will likely have in your HRIS or your HR system in terms of how old they are, gender if they want to disclose that information, or you can get into a bit of sticky water these days in terms of going just down a gender route anyways. I don't particularly enjoy just saying, well, girls like this and boys like that. It's a bit nonsensical these days. But also things like what they do. So I think a good example that I used there earlier, and someone I had a conversation with recently, they had very distinct audience cohorts. They had a big in-house operational office team where, their marketing function sat, their finance team sat, their HR team. Then they were also a retail organization. So they had tons of staff out actually on the shop floor. Those two audiences are really, really different, just in terms of what they do, their access to technology, and we'll pick up on some of that a bit later as well. Even things like what language is being spoken. Some parts of Europe are really happy to operate in an English-only environment. Others, really, you need to think about how you can perhaps adapt your approach, particularly when it comes to marketing. So also, are they working remote these days? Anyone working in an office? Is anybody, what's an office these days? I don't even know if I know. But that can also affect the mindset. So what we're trying to do is really start to put ourselves in these people's shoes and think a bit more. Okay, if I'm this sort of person and I'm this sort of age and I'm doing this, I'm doing that, what does that make me think, and how do I feel? And this is the sort of stuff that you need to start reflecting on if you want to better understand your audiences. Han, can you change the slide, please? Thank you. All right, next one. As I said, Geographics, another big influencer on people, really. Any of you that work with even just the difference between North America, America, Canada, and Europe, culturally, very, very, very different. We all speak English, at least in England and, Canada, North America, but do we all speak the same language? I'd say probably not. There's a lot of, again, nuances and foibles here that we need to just take the time to understand. What you might be thinking at this stage is, well, blimey, I could be building 1,000 personas. I could have one for each office in each location, or I could have one for each of my different functions within the business. That's not what we're trying to do here, right? What we're trying to do is create broad personas of the types of people. And what we're going to look at more is their pain points. So whilst Bob, who works in office XYZ, and, Sandra back in a retail environment, they might actually have the same problems, even though their situations are really, really different. So this exercise is really about understanding your people. But what we do with these early stages on the geographic side is trying to just give ourselves some context and ask ourselves the right questions, right? Even things like climate. I'm miserable in the northeast of England because it's never frickin' sunny. Whereas I used to live in Brighton, always basking in the sun. Jeremy's loving Bob. Bob will feature for the rest of the webinar, by the way. He's just gonna do a cameo for the rest of the session. But weather can even have an effect. Is the day sunny? Is it snowy? Is it rainy? Has it been minus 100 for 5 days? Are people miserable because of that? These all have an effect on people. And it's worth considering what that is like for them. As someone who lives in Dubai and has sunshine every day, also that sounds lovely, but horrific at the same time. So, there's got to be this consideration of all of these different types of people and how we can start to bucket them together as well. Next slide, please, Han. Thank you. So this is probably, these two next slides are the areas that I really want you guys to focus a lot on when you're building out your personas. So obviously the structured data is really important, like who they are they managing people, what sort of location are they in, how long have they been doing their job for, all that stuff's important. But this stuff is really going to be the differentiator for you in terms of, especially if you're starting to look at marketing campaigns. We're talking about value sets. We're talking about what's causing them problems, pain points. The best, most effective marketing I've ever done talks to people's challenges. Now, what's in it for me is something I harp on about an awful lot. But primarily, we need to understand what's really stopping people learning, or do they believe that learning isn't meaningful to them at work? Have they had some bad experiences in your workplace or others that make them think that way? Is there a challenging culture in your business. That means that learning is not easily accessible, or perhaps they're not given time by their managers to actually learn. Do they want to learn? Is that something they want, or do they really just care about getting a pay rise? These are all really important things, and they all come back to learning in some way or another. Maybe they want to be better at their job. Maybe they want to get a promotion, but the way that you talk to Bob, who wants a promotion, versus old Sandra, who just wants a little bit more money or recognition, how you would position learning for those two people would be very different. Because actually I'd be looking at talking to Bob about how he can improve his performance and how that will help him get a promotion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you're probably starting to see that there are a diverse range of ways that you could create personas. What we're not trying to do is just put people in a bucket, like everybody who thinks this way or wants this is like that. And as I said, we'll talk about some of the example personas and how we start to tweak those and to help you kind of decide the best ways or the best personas to kind of delve into a little bit more. And the last one, please, if you can change the slide, please, Anne, is behavior. So again, some of this you'll have in, if you guys have a learning platform, this is probably the place where you're going to get a lot of information if your platform allows you that information. And I'm aware some legacy systems don't necessarily provide the most insightful data analytics. So bear with on this one, but get the data that you can get. Things we want to know. How often are they even engaged in learning? Maybe a series of personas would be really effective. You've got advocates, people who are really proactively learning, people that you want to start championing in the business. Then you've got the average learner, someone who logs in because you tell them they got to do compliance, and maybe they have a little peruse at a few other things. Then you've got the disengaged learner. They don't even do their compliance. They're not interested. They don't have the time nor inclination to ever engage. All those people are really, really different. You might have people that are really interested in specific types of content. What areas are they interested in? Could that be another type of persona? Are you wanting to develop soft skills versus more structured skill sets? Do they have access to a mobile phone? Does that even matter? Are they more interested in consuming videos and rich media rather than e-learning? I would say yes, but use the data that you've got to actually give you some insight into that. You want to ask yourself, what are their needs, their wants, their desires, their expectations? What do they hate? What do they love? What really grinds their gears? This is all stuff we need to ask ourselves when we're building personas and really doing the good work in understanding our people better. Next slide, please, Anne. Because I hate to say it, guys, but your learners are actually savages. They don't care about anything else. Can you just do the next slide, please, Han? All they want is one single question answered. What's in it for me? If we can work at answering that singular question, whether we're looking at developing learning for our people or targeting them through campaigns to get them to actually take that learning, we need to start answering what's in it for me. A business requirement does not resonate with an employee. We need to be a certain amount compliance with our anti-money laundering. So what? Your learners don't give a crap about that. So if you want them to care, you need to start thinking about this what's in it for me piece. And I will go on and on and on and on and on and on about this because it's the biggest question that needs answering, and personas help you answer that question. Next slide, please. So like I said, I just plucked these off the internet. You can Google buyer personas and until the cows come home. I mean, HubSpot has a buyer persona generator creator. And I thought about sharing it, but it actually didn't feel quite appropriate for this because there would be quite a lot of adjustments that would need to be made for the learning side. But as you can see, they can look really, really different. We've created a template for you that you can use as at least a starting point and give you some structure. But what we're going to want to be doing is profiling. So who are these people? What do they kind of do when they're at work? We're going to focus on, again, their likes, their dislikes, their wants and needs. We also want to really examine what are they afraid of? What are their fears? What's challenging them at work? What's challenging them to stop learning or not engage with, L&D programs as a whole? What are their objections? If I'm a salesperson and I'm very good at objection handling, I need to know what those objections are first before I can ever start to help people to overcome those objections. So again, you need to understand your people's blockers to learning. Is it access? Is it time? Is it a genuine apathy towards the entire thing? Whatever it is, your approach will be different, right? So if Han will change the slide for me, I just wanted to chat through the template that we've got for you guys. And this is just a really rough template, but I've used this with clients and I find it really effective because it gives you enough information, but it's all contained on a single page of A4. It's a snapshot. And what it does is basically gives you a really clear idea of who this person is. How old are they? What function do they work in, or what team are they in, or I don't know, maybe they only want to engage on mobile or rich media content. However you decide that your personas are best placed. And some of that you might not know until you start doing some of this research and start asking these questions. And actually you might start to see trends and think, okay, we do have a big cohort of people who have this, and this. Let's build out a persona on that. But the things you want to be looking at is their goals, their motivators, but also their detractors. What's really struggling. What are they really struggling with? What do they need from L&D? I can't remember, there was a thing I saw on LinkedIn maybe last week, and it was basically it was almost like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like what people need in order to be able to learn. What are they afraid of? Thanks, Andrew. Nice to see you. Bye. What are they afraid of? What's becoming a blocker for learning? These are vital questions that we must ask. And I know some of you guys are already doing that. A lot of you guys said you felt like your people. So it is a case of almost documenting this and starting to really understand it and holding yourself accountable to these personas so that you can start to really vary what you're doing, and even with the limited capabilities that you do have with your tech stack, start to do some level of personalization. And by that, I mean, not just sending the same thing out to every single person across your 80,000 strong employee base. We're going to look at tailoring these approaches a little bit differently. And, also just changing how we speak to people, how we showcase what we're doing, et cetera, et cetera. So I will send that template out to everybody off the back of this call, along with the partial recording that I will also add a bit in at the beginning. But I think, is there any more slides, Han? I can't remember. I just finished building these. Oh, that was the final reminder. We want to trigger emotions here, guys. This is what creates the more memorable experiences for people. So this whole exercise is really about us starting to unearth the psyche of our people, get under their skin and understand what makes them tick, so that we can tailor our approaches to really touch on those emotional triggers. Don't always have to be positive either. Don't be afraid to tap into the fear or the pain points. Some of the most effective marketing in the world is sold on fear. And I'm not saying that you go and absolutely terrify your learners that everybody's going to die if they don't undertake some compliance training, but there are a spectrum of emotions that we can look at tapping into here to create more evocative learning experiences. Last slide. So that is me in a whirlwind. I feel like I've chatted a bit of nonsense, and also, apologize immensely about the loss of slide deck halfway through. You've probably come to expect nothing less. But I'd really like to give you guys, we have time if you want to ask questions. Otherwise, Hannah's going to have to announce her chosen winner for the background. I know the pressure's on, Hannah. But yeah, feel free to either pop questions if you want to unmute yourself, or we can look in the chat as well. Or Hannah, if you've seen any come up whilst I've been chatting as well.
I've got a question, if that's all right.
Yeah, please.
Firstly, thank you very much for the all the information. It's been really enlightening, and I'm excited to get started on my personas that I've been promising to do for 4 months now. Um, so, how would you go about getting the information for the psychographics, like the values of the employees, and understanding their attitudes and things? Because I'm just thinking how we've got 15,000 employees, and I'm thinking, how do I get all this information for all these people?
You have a good relationship with internal comms?
Yes, yeah, I very closely, yeah.
Okay, so I guess you've got two angles, right? So you could either have internal comms. So I would suggest you basically outreach to them. So I would use something called Typeform personally to build out a survey. I think you can build a couple for free, but they're really nice. They're really dynamic web pages, and it's really easy to use, and it's quite familiar to people these days. It's a lot less dull than SurveyMonkey. You can put images in and all sorts of stuff. So I would probably build a survey, first of all, around the sort of things that I want to know, what's important to people. You might have some of this if your company does an employee engagement survey, for example. You might get some information that way as well. But that's what I would do. I would build out a survey, and then either I would maybe put it in a couple of places if you have any sort of notifications that you could put in your platform or something to highlight it that way, but also talk to comms if there was maybe a way to send a kind of en masse message that you're really trying to get some insights and feedback, and just really kind of gauge the level of engagement from people, but also, like we said, just really get understanding what's going on there, because that's the one bit where we don't want to assume, because it's really vital that we ask those questions and we understand what people are really worried about or concerned about.
Definitely. I think for us, when we've done surveys in the past, you always get the really engaged people that are the ones that feed back, and the people that I want to hear from are the people that don't want to answer my survey, because those are the people that are disengaged with the learning, I would say. But yeah, no, that's surveys are a good way to start.
Yeah, and also
that's a big point as well.
Cadences as well. Look at leadership and how you can start to get some cadences in stand-ups and team environments as well. Managers are probably the most undervalued comms channel in a business, in my opinion, but getting them engaged is sometimes hard too. So it's that first step, I guess, is, you can't improve what you're doing if people aren't willing to actually give you 5 minutes of their time. Don't make the survey long. You could even just ask single questions initially or something like that. What's the biggest question? Make it as easy as possible. Like if I'm doing a form on my website, right, I put as little fields as possible so that there's people aren't like, oh God, I don't want to do 5 pages of filling that in, So it's, again, just what can we do to make it as easy as possible for people, make it multi-choice. Then, that would be a good tip as well. Don't have like free text fields where possible, just because for you to actually compare and contrast and analyze that data, it becomes rather cumbersome when you've just got this kind of like huge amount of text to, how many people did you say you had? 50,000?
15. About 15.
That's still too much,
Still a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you could always have like an additional feedback or comment section. You're going to probably get 5% of responses that way, but at least if you do kind of either check boxes or radio buttons, you're going to, get a little bit more structured data. Then you can build out pivot tables and things in Excel super easy and compare the data really simply.
Cool. Thank you very much.
And did you have something you wanted to say?
I was just going to say about not I think in L&D we often go, oh, okay, we need to find out things from our learners, let's put it in the learning platform, and when your learners aren't engaged, that's just foolproof. Like, it's stupid. Like, why would you do that? So you need to think outside the box. And if you've got, especially with such a big company, you've probably got some kind of intranet messaging system or something like that. Try to feed it through that way and reach people where they are rather than expecting them to come to you.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really valid point. Like, you are the veritable tree at the moment, right? So if they're not using your platform, it's not a good comms channel for you.
So if you're a consultant and you're working with, if you're working with leadership of a client company, don't take their word for it. If they tell you, oh, these are the personas that we have, you have to validate what they're saying. And the best way to do that is to, if you can, interview some people who work on the front line and find out kind of who they are and who they hang out with and what they're really about at work and outside of work. But I've seen that happen too many times where someone goes in and they sit down with the VP of HR and the VP of client services, and they tell them, "Oh yeah, these are the personas," and we all know how that story goes. They don't engage with the training. The LMS doesn't have any information, and it's one of those things that just drops off the face of the earth.
Yeah, and I think actually that's another really important point, is that these should be iterated and stress tested regularly too. They're not like anything, they're not a constant. As your workforce changes and evolves, and your working culture, your learning culture, etc., changes, so will the mindsets of the types of people that work for you will shift, even just on a generational level. Yet, we've got 4 generations in the workforce now, but some of that, as we advance, will decline again. So, this should be a iterative process, where it's almost like build some out, and then if you're feeling like it, test it. If it's not working, then continue to evolve and iterate. Don't be afraid to change what your initial assumptions are. And I think,
your pre-COVID personas died a year ago, March, right? So What are your personas now?
Yeah.
Who knows, right?
Exactly. And that's it. And, no one could have anticipated this. So if you're still treating, everybody like they're based in an office when you've now got a completely remote workforce, then something's, going to have to shift. So absolutely.
So I think we've got a question. Lexi, have you got a question? I saw you raised your hand.
Yeah. So I guess my question is around like how much of the persona do you feel should be data informed if the people data is limited? Because my biggest fear, like it's actually something we're working on in the L&D product team at the moment. My biggest fear is reinforcing negative stereotypes based on like the assumptions of the people creating the personas, and then catering to assumptions. But the people data is really quite limited, and while we put out surveys and things like that, engagement with surveys is currently an issue that we have. So I know the working iteratively is the route we're going. But yeah, I just wanted to sort of gauge your opinion on that. And something that's come up for us is like using images in personas. Is that a good thing? Because someone could see themselves in that image and see something really negative. And I think one of the bits of feedback that I got from our legal director was that she felt the persona was a bit of a caricature of her, and she didn't like it at all. So yeah, just your thoughts on that.
First of all, I would say keep your personas to internal to your team only. No one the end recipient never needs to know what you're doing here, right? They don't need to kind of understand the secret sauce of what you're doing and how you're segmenting them. And it does kind of creep people out. Like, we know Google's stalking us, but when I suddenly get an ad that's, pushed to me on Instagram from a site I looked at 4 weeks ago or was verbally discussing with somebody, it suddenly gives me a little chill. So yeah, be more discreet with that, I would say, but also you're going to have to be okay with making some assumptions. If you've got limited data, then I would look at things that you do know about the people, so instead of focusing on the behavioral pieces, at least maybe start trying to look at, okay, what are going to be the pain points of somebody that works in an office environment. I don't know what industry you work in, but I'll use the retail example again, someone in an office versus a shop and how different that is. I mean, that alone is going to be significant if you weren't doing any segmentation before that. So I think, use them as a baseline and a starting point and a springboard. Don't hold yourself ransom to them, and don't say, well, we can't do personas because we've not got any data at all. We're going to have to make some generalizations. If photographs are, a sticking point, I would just go down some random objects that have no connotations. There's no issues with diversity and things like that, because there are sensitivities that need to be considered there. I give you permission to use pineapples, but whatever works for you. So I think primarily that's what I would say is get as much data as you can. If you're finding that what you're getting is not enough, especially on the behavior side, if what's there is really limited, then make some guesses, or look at your different audiences. Have we got age ranges? Is there enough of a big pool for those age ranges for us to really justify doing segmentation? And because what you're doing when you're segmenting is actually tripling your efforts. If you have 3 personas and you're segmenting 3 times, you've got to do three times as much stuff, right? So be mindful of your own time too. And even if you just develop 2 initially, that's completely going to separate what you're doing. So yeah, I would say use caution and don't make too many assumptions, particularly on that diversity piece. And also be aware of confirmation bias, right? And unconscious bias too.
I've actually got quite a few questions in the chat panel, Ash. I'm just going to start reading some to you if people are okay for time. So we've got one that probably leads on from Lexi's question of what are some of the major errors people make when creating learner personas?
Thinking that they're absolute, and not allowing room for the human foibles within that. Like, oh well, this person sits in this persona and they're not doing this and this. Well, we are factoring in the human condition here. We're not trying to sell to a static TV or something. These are people, and their life experiences will form how they think and feel. So with the best will in the world, these are not perfect, and they're not going to make everything that you do just be absolutely phenomenal. But what they are going to do is allow you to tailor your approach at least a little bit to other people. And instead of just doing spray and pray, spray and pray, spray and pray, throwing a lot of stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks, you're actually able to formulate your approaches a little bit more. So don't hold yourself too ransom to them. If you're finding that they're not working, go back to the drawing board and ask yourself why.
I'll put nothing to add to that. Right, another question.
Yep.
As you mentioned, there are so many things you could look at for learner personas, and we're able to get an idea of a type of person. But are there some that are stronger starting points than others, or certain criteria you would suggest are most useful?
Yeah. So some that I think would probably be the most pragmatic approaches for L&D in particular is either the engagement level. So people who are, not really doing anything versus those that are like advocates and really proactive, because, the advocates and the people who are really proactively learning, depending on what you're doing, you could potentially use those people to start becoming speaker boxes for L&D and help you champion it and become an extension of your voice. So that could be an interesting angle. Job role can be, if you're going to be really simplified with it, seniority is another, I think. It ultimately depends on what programs you've got going on at the moment, how many employees you've got, and what capacity you've got in-house in L&D to actually do some of this stuff. But I would say simply job titles, job roles, kind of job functions or responsibilities could be an interesting one. Tenure in role, I would maybe add within that, someone who's really new to the business versus someone who's quite established. And again, if you combine that with how engaged they are, you might get some interesting views there. For me, I would kind of just play around with, what that looks like. So if I was like, okay, I'm going to look at how many people have been in the business for 5 years and have at least logged into my platform in the past 3 months, what's that looking like? And is there a cohort there? So you might have to play around with it a little bit, Other things I would say is the types of content that they're likely to consume. So again, if you have an older LMS, you might not even have a variety of content barring e-learning in your system. But if you have more, the newer LXP types, you're going to have a variety of content in there. And again, that's kind of interesting for me because someone who is more inclined to consume a video, how you might get them to connect with content is going to be really different than someone who does prefer to read. And I'm not talking learning styles. I'm not even opening that can of worms. But what I am saying is, everybody has a preference for how they like to consume. For example, I love to read, but I cannot get on board with audiobooks. I've really tried to listen to books. Brain, no bueno, will not do it. So, that's maybe a couple of at least starting points to consider.
Look for what the most glaring differences are in the organization, like technical versus non-technical versus admin, leadership versus burger flipper. Start with a very broad brush and then kind of refine it from there. But you're looking for the broadest differences that you can find, whether they are job or culture or whatever, but find those glaring gaps. And that's where I tend to start.
And also, I would say as well, those pain points, right? So where people are struggling, because it is easy to say that, leadership versus burger flipper are very different, but actually, are their pain points the same or different? Likely they are, but again, what are they struggling with at work? What's really challenging them? Those emotional drivers and those triggers are really the stuff that I think is more interesting, because that's where it really connects with people. So, if we start going down a job title route, for example, it is self-limiting in some ways, because I'm not my job title. Like, I'm a managing director of a really tiny marketing agency, but that's not who I am. And that's not, it may be a part of my identity, but that doesn't really necessarily affect my mindset in the same way when we're talking about trying to get people to take learning, right? So I think I feel like that's a bit of a politician's answer, in that, there are so many different ways that you can do this, but, look at those pain points. What are the blockers to L&D in your organization, and what types of people are fitting in some of those buckets? That could be a really good place to start.
And put all of those assumptions up against the content and the delivery and all of those things.
And then prove or disprove those assumptions, right? That all we're doing when we're getting data and making assumptions is almost creating hypotheses. We think that this will happen. Okay, it didn't. I'm going to go and examine why and then reiterate. That's all we're doing.
Okay, we've got another question. How would you creatively approach delivering training to very senior, highly educated people, like maths PhD type teams?
How would I curate training or create training?
Creatively approach delivering training.
Right. Well, I mean, this isn't really a conversation about training delivery in the same sense of the word, because then you're kind of getting down TNA routes, as well as, what capabilities you have in house to actually deliver training. Is it virtual? Is it a classroom? Is it a blended approach? Is it a program of learning? Can you give me a bit more information on like, for example, if it's a learning program, then I would probably build some sort of small comms campaign to sit under that throughout the duration of the program to keep people engaged and connected. But ultimately, in terms of the delivery itself, I'm not a learning designer, and whilst I can talk to the subject at will, I wouldn't claim to even want to address that in any really knowledgeable way.
Yeah, and I think that goes to your other question as well, Agata. So if you want to give us a bit more context, we're more than happy to discuss.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm...
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Thanks. Very good presentation, by the way. Thank you very much. It's a question related to, there is a platform that they use, yes, internally. It's Udemy for Business, currently. So this is the role that I'm going into. So I'm moving from one job to another, and that's what they use. And this is the team I will be working with. And how, obviously, I haven't explored the platform yet, so I don't know what they offered. I'm going to get into that, but I can already, because I'm also coming from the technical background in terms of where I'm working now, and sometimes it's very difficult to engage this type of learners into participating in the training, and this is even higher level. So I wouldn't be delivering the training, but I would be kind of engaging them into participating in the training that the platform offers, which I haven't explored yet. So it's kind of a question of how would you try to engage them more, and almost, having the resources that platform has, sell it more to them.
Yeah. So I mean,
that helps.
Yeah, no, that's a lot more clarity. Thank you. I mean, obviously, you know, I think that marketing needs to be employed more in these sort of environments. You know, you've given us a very fantastic example of people who are enrolled on some sort of training program, but they don't necessarily want to engage with it. They don't want to partake in it. Now, the question of why that's the case is up for discussion, and you know, could answer some of your persona questions. But what I think you probably need in that circumstance is, you know, you've got an audience cohort that you need to engage. So who are they? What do they want? Again, what's in it for me? And then build a campaign around that. You know, if you don't have, in my experience, in-house L&D don't have all of the marketing channels in the world, right? You guys are quite limited. You've got your in-house, or you've got an intranet. Maybe you've got a comms channel like a Slack or a Yammer, or you know, something for business or whatever it is. You've probably got some level of email, which is a very noisy channel in my experience, and maybe you've got your platform and office type stuff, and like I said, your managers and your cadences that way. So it's quite limited. You know, we can't be so targeted. Like I can go on LinkedIn right now and go, I'm going to spend $2,000 and I'm going to target these specific people in this country with this job title. You guys can't do that. So you need to be more creative with how you're going to engage with these people. And so think about what they need. Why would they take this course? What is of value to them? Is it going to help them be better at their jobs? You know, those examples I said earlier, is it going to help them improve their professional profile? You know, ask yourself these questions in terms of the key drivers for those individuals, and tailor your messaging appropriately. So, you know, instead of just like, hey, we've got this piece of e-learning, or, you know, this course that we want you to take, it's actually like, you know, here are the benefits and here's why it's going to be useful for you to give us 5 hours of your time, or whatever it might be. So it's just flipping it on its head, and instead of like mandating it from the business and saying, we want you to do this and you must, it's actually hey, you know, think about how the marketing stuff that you consume online, you know, it's very much like, here it is, good for you, come when you want to come, you know. And so you do that consistently over time. By consistency, I don't mean just sending the same thing over and over again. I mean, if you define that kind of overarching driver for these people is, you know, they I don't know, they want to look good to their peers, they want to show off, whatever, maybe they're showy people, then that's your kind of branching brand message, right? And then there should be a lot of content that sits underneath that in terms of how would you communicate someone who wants to be posh. You know, I don't know, if I was talking to somebody who liked to be showy, I'd look at expensive watches and expensive cars and houses, you know. So we're not always saying the exact same thing, but it should all marry back up to that primary message.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that helps.
We've got 2 more questions, Ash.
Yep. I'm just conscious of time, but you guys are more than welcome to stay as long as you like.
So the last one, I think, just reaffirms what you've already said. So is it best to use the persona to get the learner to the learning intervention?
Yeah. I mean, I personally, if I was in-house, I would be developing these personas not only to help me understand the way that I should create training and learning experiences, but then how I best market it to the people that I'm trying to contact. So, you know, it can be a double-edged sword for you if you do them right. And, you know, the reality is you just got to look at that persona in 2 different lenses, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, whether you're looking at the learning lens or the marketing lens. But, you know, they are cut from the same cloth. How many more like analogies can I use today? Jeez.
I don't know, but I'm enjoying it. I feel like we should set you a challenge. Right, final question. How do you translate the persona into a campaign to drive LMS adoption?
So it's very similar to what I just said, really. Boil it down to key pain points, key drivers, you know, one overarching message. So when I develop a campaign, if I'm looking at, you know, usually I would have a campaign span, say 6 months. So if you're procuring a new platform, you know, you've got a platform in-house, maybe it's replacing a legacy system. already you're contending with probably a relatively apathetic audience set. If your old platform has been kind of lackluster and the experiences that those people have had, you've got to build trust back up with these people and prove to them that learning is of value and that it's going to positively affect their day-to-day lives, and that they're not going to sit and press the next button for the 2 hours and wish they hadn't. So there's a piece that you've got to overcome straight away. But I would look at building a campaign that spans a period of time, which is looking at elevating the brand as a whole. So again, if we're looking at how we could use personas to inform that, if you've got your 3 different audience sets, and we've just done it on the engagement piece, you've got your really engaged people who would be like, new opportunities for learning to help you progress your career, versus the really disengaged people, where it is going to have to be, did you know that this can help you do this, this, or this? Did you know that if you had these skills, you could get, a pay rise of X amount, et cetera, et cetera. So, you're going to have to try some different tactics, but you need to understand primarily what are the blockers initially and how can you overcome them. So why aren't people engaging with the system now? And use that as your starting point. Answer those questions. I don't know if you've ever heard of something called a value proposition canvas. I would highly recommend you look at that. So it basically looks like a product, but in this instance, it would be your learning platform. And you would almost define what are the pros and what are the benefits, et cetera, of the product. And then you look at your audiences in terms of their needs, wants, et cetera, et cetera. That process is an incredible process, because that, again, will just help you understand how your product needs to be tailored to what your audience is feeling and needing from you. My pleasure. All right. Any more? Han, you need to decide a winner.
I think Emily's just swayed it, because I've just realised it also says Barney loves personas on it.
I did customize it slightly.
And I love Barney, and I love that Barney loves personas, but I also do really love Bob. And was it Sandra the pineapple? You've named Sandra. So
Sandra the pineapple. Beautiful. Well, look, I'll be in touch. Thank you guys for doing those backgrounds. It's always a bit of fun. But Emily, I'll get in touch and we can have a chat and, get that hours consultancy booked in. It sounds like, at least there's some stuff we can talk to that's really going to be practical for you, really. So hopefully it will be of help. And Jeremy and Dave, I'll be in touch with you guys as well. And we can have a chat. So thank you guys for sticking with us for nearly an hour. Apologies for all the text drama. But yeah, give us a shout. You know where we are if you have any questions. I'm always on LinkedIn pretty much. So, if there's anything you want clarifying, I'll send the persona template out. Probably going to be Monday now, to be honest. But yeah, I'll get everything out to you guys in due course. See you later. Thanks so much,
everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.